For instance, the two biggest industries that China had been able to build, one is solar panels. Now that homes in California, before they put on these tariffs, homes in California, ordinary people could actually buy solar panels at reasonable cost so they can pay back, which was a fraction of what they had to pay 10 years ago when the costs were so high. It didn't pay, and China made that possible.
I was thinking about just the current sort of political climate in the United States, where it doesn't need to be at that level of stress. It can simply be in the case of the United States where, cost of living is going up, inflation is rising. Everybody's worrying about the price of filling up their tank of gas. I think Joe Biden, when he was on the campaign trail for president, talked a lot about a green agenda. Now, in 2022, when he's in office, and these are the challenges domestically that are gripping the headlines, it would almost seem out of touch for him and his administration to be pushing the climate agenda. It's like, why are you thinking about that when you haven't dealt with the supply chain crisis, when you haven't dealt with inflation, you haven't dealt with these other questions? And Terry, I wonder, you've been leading the environmental conversation in your country now for decades. So how do you wedge the conversation into the present moment? And I wonder if you have thoughts about whether it's going to be the US or China that is going to sort of take the reins of global leadership when it comes to driving some of these hard choices forward.
Well, look, I think the planet is making this front and center every day. Even the skeptics we saw recently on Fox News, which is our right-wing news channel here in the United States that has denied climate for decades. In an interview recently with a farmer in a very right-wing state, probably a Trump supporter, who finally was admitting that his crops are dying and his farm income is devastated. And at the end of it, when he was talking to the interviewer, he said, well, I guess this climate thing is real. So even in the states and among the population that wasn't taking it seriously, it's affecting everyone. And it's in the news every day now. They're going to see whether it's more fires, more intense storms, sea level rise. Miami was underwater again. Just yesterday, day before, the city of Miami Beach has had to spend $500 million to raise the roads and put in pumps for dry weather flooding because of sea level rise. And the list goes on and on, especially when it comes to agriculture with droughts and more intense storms and so forth. So I think that's going to get wedged into the conversation. I think there's then, unfortunately, a sense of hopelessness. It's not like, I don't know if anyone saw the movie Don't Look Up, where Leonardo DiCaprio played a scientist and was trying to tell everyone that there was a meteor, an asteroid headed for Earth, and we could send up a missile and blow it out of the sky if we just acted soon enough. And of course, nobody did, and the worst happened. But at least there was something that governments could get together and do, and the people could demand it, and there was a very clear time window. And I think it's great that China, for example, has 5-year plans. I wish the United States and other countries did the same thing, because you could then hold your leaders accountable. You could see what's possible. It would take things like, for example, California with its clean car standards or the energy efficiency standards I mentioned before, or the incentives for more renewable energy, and put that on a national basis and on a sense of national urgency and shared investment and shared sacrifice and so forth, which I think China has done very well in terms of every 5 years saying, look, here's how we're going to make the country better, more prosperous, cleaner, et cetera. And then look, if it misses a target, it's explained. It's, people say, all right, here's what we have to do better next time. But I think that's part of it. So to answer the second half of your question, who's going to take leadership on this? I don't know that it's going to be enough if any one country does. And so far, we've seen that no country, China and the US, each seem to be waiting for each other. And we know there's people in both countries that say, well, if the other country doesn't do it, what does our contribution matter? And unfortunately, sometimes those people win the day. But I think that the collective leadership is going to have to come from many, not from any one. I don't think it's going to be one big superpower that says, okay, here's how we're going to solve this. I think it's going to come from sharing these lessons. Sometimes it's the meekest among us. I remember when the Prime Minister of the Maldives held a cabinet meeting underwater in order to demonstrate that his country was slowly sinking into the Indian Ocean. So it's hard to say what's going to spur people to take more action, especially to make more demands of their people. But I do think that certainly the Chinese model of 5-year plans is one thing that we could emulate. And certainly a lot of the work that's been done in both countries is good. It just needs to go faster and all across the world.
Maybe if I could follow on that and just, Eric, provoke you a bit. I mean, it's great to hear, and I'd love to hear more of just sort of your anecdotal experiences, conversations, and such around Xi Jinping's personal commitment to the green agenda, to climate change. At least in my life, I haven't seen China step into a kind of leadership role on climate internationally. I mean, if we look at the Kyoto Protocol, if we look at the Paris Climate Accord, China, from my perspective, wasn't driving that agenda. Came to the table, came on board. I thought that was a really interesting insight around this sort of generational shift from giving up the symbol of common and differentiated responsibility to recognizing, okay, we're all in this together. But so let me push you on that. Is China going to step forward and start pushing the international agenda? Convince me, I guess, is what I'm asking you to do.
No, I would say, I think what the Chinese will do is that, like I said, China is now the world's largest industrial base. China makes everything for the world. Now, obviously, in the process of making these things for the world, we emit a lot of carbon dioxide into the environment. So I think what China will do is to figure out ways, both through government and state actions, through political actions, but also market innovation, to figure out a way to improve these industrial processes so that they help the climate, that they reduce carbon emissions. So if China could do that, I mean, that's a huge portion of the world's industrial capacity, of the world's industrial production that everybody uses around the globe. I'm a venture capitalist, so we see this. There are two aspects to it. One is, our experience the last 20, 30 years is that when it comes to the environment, it's just, the market and innovation and private sector, it's just not going to cut it. It's just, that didn't solve the air problem in Beijing, okay? It didn't solve any of these, the lake or the rivers, all the stuff I talked about. So the most important actor is the state through collective and political actions, through politics. I mean, I think that, that China does have that capacity. Not to say that the market and entrepreneurship don't matter, they do. For instance, the two biggest industries that China had been able to build, one is solar panels. Now that homes in California, before they put on these tariffs, homes in California, ordinary people could actually buy solar panels at reasonable cost that they can pay back, which was a fraction of what they had to pay 10 years ago when the costs were so high. It didn't pay, and China made that possible. So solar panel. Second is EV, electric vehicle. China is becoming the biggest producer, I think one of the biggest producers of EV, and will be the biggest producer of EV for the world. Both industries in the beginning were seeded by the state, by the government. We all talk about consumption subsidies, right? If you buy EV, these subsidies are actually less important. What's the most important for those two industries is what I call capital subsidy. So in the beginning, government fronted the capital because there's no private capital, including myself, would invest in that stuff because it's too risky. and returns are too low. But once the government subsidizes the capital, then private capital will come in to fund the incentive-driven activities that we could leverage on the government state capital. So they fixed the return on capital problem. Then the market kicked in. So all these processes, all these sectors, I could see new technologies are emerging that if the government, if the state could provide capital incentive, then private capital comes in and to innovate for technology to reduce emission. I mean, I think that's the biggest contribution China could make because it's the industrial base for the world.